Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back. This is going to be a fun Tackle Tuesday, or depending on what day you might be listening this or watching this, Tackle Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. But this is going to be all about pairing spinning rods and reels. It is probably one of the most popular questions that we receive, both from the public and from our insider, club. We know we have a club, as you guys probably know, with 14,000 members. If you haven't joined, I hate to say it, but you're really missing out. And, one of the big perks, besides all the interactive coaching and having an amazing network, is you get 20% off all of the best tackle. We do not want to be a Bass Pro and just have a bunch of stuff, mostly junk. We want to have the very, very, very best, including the very best rods and reels that we have personally used on the water and personally put to the test and personally dunked in salt water to see how they last. And because we have a lot of members coming in that are wanting to take advantage of their 20% off to buy, new Daiwas. And I got some brand new Shimano Sustain right here. The question we hear all the time is, what should I pair it up with? And I'm going to let my co-host here, Wyatt, Mark, and Luke here chime in a second. But I do want to start off. I'm seeing a trend that most of the questions begin with, I bought this reel, and now I'm looking to pair it up with a rod. And not that anything's wrong with that, but I do want to address this. The rod is more important than the reel. And maybe unless you're doing Cuban yo-yo fishing or something, but the rod is more important than the reel. And so I think a lot of us need to kind of flip that upside down and think about the rod application first and then pairing it up with the reel. Guys, you want to chime in, and then we can get into this highly debated content of rod and reel pairing?
But I'll start. I don't think we should say that the rod is always more important than the reel.
Okay.
But
when is it not?
So when trolling, like if you're offshore fishing and trolling, you're not casting, where you literally are just the only, you're just letting the line out. And
probably not using a spinning reel either, though.
Some people do, but yeah, for inshore fishing, when casting is involved on a spinning gear, the reel plays pretty much no part in the cast. All it does is you flip open the bail, and its only premise is to get out of the way and let the rod do the work. The rod does the most work. And for many years, I did what Joe was talking about, where I was so focused on the reel, I would just go out and I was total reel focus, and then I would just go buy a combo or whatever. Just the rod was just whatever I could get a good deal on. And that significantly hindered my ability to catch fish, because now I wasn't able to cast very good. I wasn't able to feel the strikes very good. I wasn't able to get good hook sets. And that was because I had a crappy rod. I just had a rod that really wasn't very good. And because I was so focused on the reel. So now I definitely spend way more money on my rods than I do my reels once I finally put it in perspective. So
yeah.
Casting rod is extremely important.
Don't disagree, but I do want to make sure that the general public does understand that I still want to have a quality line management system, being a reel, but yes, I agree 100%. The rod is a huge focus when it comes to the casting, the sensitivity, the feel of the bite, everything. But at the same time, I'm not going to put a $29 reel that's in a clam pack on a E6X G Loomis blank. I kind of do want to match the performance of products when available. And in my opinion, that as long as you're in that $100 threshold and above and getting products that are made for saltwater, the rod then becomes that much more important piece of that scenario, in my opinion.
Cool. Wyatt, we don't want your opinion on this, but at least talk so you show up on camera so we can all see the beard.
Hello, everybody. I'm here with my beard.
Last time that we went live, we had quite a few people chime in about all of our beards. Wyatt being completely beardless, Mark very clean shaven. He was going on some kind of I don't know, crazy Atkins diet or something, and he was shaving, and Luke had kind of recently shaved, so had I. So the beards are coming back, guys and gals. Don't you worry. Don't you fret. Beards are coming back. What was your analogy to your special lady friend?
So, it's a lot like, a chef when they go to tell somebody that they cook good food. If, you got a skinny chef, you can't really trust what he says. With outdoorsmen, if they've got a beard, we've seen Luke's catches, as he has more facial hair, the size of the snook he catches seem to increase. So I find, it's a pretty good correlation there. More facial hair, better fishermen, more people are going to, listen to what you have to say. So I've started to grow out the beard as well.
Now, how does that work for the gender divide?
That's a whole nother podcast for Mark. Oh, but I know we're on the topic of rods and reels. I was somebody that for so long, I was eagerly awaiting the iCast sessions where they'd announce, new reels, because I was so excited to see that new thing. And a lot of times I was just caught up on the cosmetics. I didn't even take into consideration the weight of the reels, all the different drag components, the internal components. I was so focused on, oh my gosh, that looks so cool. And, hats off to Penn, they do a great job making their reels look really nice. But when I started, learning more about inshore fishing, learning about the specs of rods and reels, and how much really, the rod in terms of castability, sensitivity, the smoothness as you're working your lure, that rod is so much more important than the reel is in terms of inshore fishing. I know there's a lot of other applications for different fishing rods, but I've mainly focused on inshore fishing. So, my rod, I'm now looking towards iCast to see what new rods they're going to put out, what new machinery. I'm going to talk about some St. Croix today. The stuff that some people are doing with these rods is going to drastically change, how you can present your lure, the strength you have when fighting a fish, which is, very important. We've all lost fish during a fight. And a lot of times it's because we're not applying the right amount of pressure, or the rod is not applying the right amount of pressure during the fight, So we're going to talk about all that stuff today. And I'm really excited to share my thoughts on all that stuff too.
Cool. So where do you guys want to get started? Do you guys want to go to individual reels? Because that seems to be the question, right? Hey, I just bought a new Daiwa Fuego 3000. What do I pair it up with? And not just brand, but do I go 7? Do I go 7.6? Do I do this medium heavy? And there seems to be so many questions. And I think part of it we talked about on a prior podcast was that there's no exact specifications for these manufacturers. They all, kind of phrase things a little bit differently, which can get incredibly confusing across brands. Obviously, the 7.6 is going to be congruent across the brands, but other than that, there's no real guidelines to it. So how do you guys want to get started?
I think we should just let's just put it in perspective as far as where the importance is. So the rod. Said that. No, but I mean, like to even more so. So the rod, again, it helps you cast for distance and accuracy. It sets the hook, feels the strike. It just does a lot of stuff. And the reel is basically there to provide drag, right? When you hook into a good fish, you need a good drag system. And where I spend way too much time trying to look, oh my gosh, this reel doesn't have a 20-pound drag, it's a piece of junk. For those of us who use light braid, like I use 10-pound braid almost all the time for 99% of my inshore fishing. And the actual tension, your drag tension, regardless of what line you're using, should be about 20 to 30% of your weakest line strength. So in my case, my weakest line strength is 10 pounds. So I only need 2 to 3 pounds of drag. And even the $30 piece of junk reels have 33 pounds of drag. And so really drag, I guess strength is a factor that I don't even think about anymore. I do want to have a smooth drag, but I will, like now I will gladly spend over $200 on a rod. I will very rarely ever spend more than $90 on a reel. Or at least I would say under 100. So I keep that in
when you take your 20% insider discount. You mean.
Correct. Yeah. Now we have 20%. It's down in the 80s. But so just for that reason, because the rod is just so much more important. Obviously, if you're doing live bait fishing, the least amount of casting and the casting versus fighting fish ratio for those like live baiters or people who are trolling and you really aren't casting very much and you're really just there to like if you're going after tarpon or like really, really big fish. and you need that stronger drag, then definitely, having a reel with a much stronger drag capacity is smart. But again, for most inshore fishing, like if you're going after sea trout especially, or like just normal size reds, normal size snook, you don't need more than again, 3 pounds of drag, but all reels have that.
Yeah, and touching on a point that Joe said earlier, number one, reels are fun to talk about. They're mechanical, things are moving. There's nothing really sexy about a rod, but when you start to look at the dynamics of rods, and this is where I kind of want to get into my point, there are a lot of features that really make and break rods in certain scenarios, just like they do with reels. What is the difference between Joe's Fuego that he's holding up and this BG that I'm holding up? The industry is going to tell you, hey, use that Fuego for your artificial. Use the BG more so for your live bait, cut bait scenarios. It's a heavier reel. So, we can discuss that, a little bit later. But on the rod, for instance, that I have here in the office, so now you're looking at an E6X. Okay. Well, this particular one is a mag moderate rod. So they have functions built into this rod that I don't think that a lot of consumers really understand what actions and powers and tips and, guides, the inserts, the framing, the reel seats. There's so many things about the rods that people just don't get. And the reason why I think that is the case is because there's so much confusion. There's no symmetry across the industry. When someone says that I have a medium rod fast action, I mean, it's a completely different base for every manufacturer. And I think that that's where the most confusion is in our industry. Why do I use a mag moderate, rod? I like that tip, so a tip to me is very important, to how that thing will load and unload on a cast. And Luke, you just mentioned yourself that one of the most important features of the rod is the castability, to really get that lure at its maximum distance from you for not only sound, but to cover the most in water column fishing. Okay. So that's where the casting side of this rod really shines. But I like the mag moderate side to it. When it comes down to the power rating of this rod, the power section of the rod extends further into the tip design. So if I do cast a top water plug, 70, 80, 90 feet away from the boat, and I do have to have a hard hook set because of the distance, that power rating on the rod will help me bury a single, replacement hook into a fish on a long cast. So, to me, I think the most important part of this, discussion is to talk about that what makes a rod. Why is the modulus such an important factor? The higher the modulus, the more sensitivity the rod will get, but also the more brittle it becomes. What is the importance of a good guide system? Why more guides are sometimes the best scenario, because it's more contact points with the line. So the more guides that I have, the more sensitivity and the more vibration I get down the blank. So to me, I would like to, to focus on why the rods are important into the scenario. So.
Oh yeah, I'd say keep going on that. That's a critical part, and explain what modulus means too. We all agreed before this, no big words. Every time Mark's got to bring big words into it.
There's no dictionaries needed for any of this, Mark.
That's it. That's it. So, I think as a company, Bass Pro Shops really is the one that got modulus out on Main Street, right? So a lot of their rods, it always listed what level of modulus, however many millions of these graphite, particles make up this blank. So the higher the modulus, the more sensitive the graphite becomes. So that's why you see on a lot of their blanks that you'll see, 50 million modulus makes up their graphite blank. And all they're telling you is that ton fiber that they use for this product to make this actual blank material, the higher that they are going, they're trying to give you the most sensitive product possible. But when you go up in that scale, you're going down in the scale of power, of breakability, so the higher that you go, the more sensitive it is, but the more often it will break. So when you're fishing with a stick like that, it's really conducive to keeping your bait in that I'm never going to go higher than 10 o'clock on the spectrum. Because if I do go to a high stick capability of the rod, that tip is just going to fold down and it's going to pop your rod. So you got to fish a rod with higher modulus different than you would with something that's a lower modulus on the spectrum.
Yeah, and on the flip side, those rods that I won't say any brands, but the rods that pride themselves in being unbreakable, right, where you can like get them in a door and totally crush it and not break it, or you can get a 10-pound brick and then hold your rod straight up and the rod won't break. That's going to mean that you're going to really miss out on sensitivity. Because I used to go get those rods. Oh man, I'm never going to break this. This is awesome. But as long as you take care of your rod, I haven't used those rods in 10 plus years, and I've still yet to ever break a rod while fishing. Even if you have those high sensitive rods that Mark mentioned, which will absolutely help you catch more fish because you can feel so much better. As long as you just make sure not to go above, Mark said 10 o'clock, but really 90 degrees. Just don't go perpendicular to whatever your target is, and set your drag properly. If you just do one of those, make sure to do at least one of those, you should never break your rod. Because you're just not going to have if you just have 10-pound line and 3 pounds of pressure is not going to break that rod. And then obviously don't slam it indoors. Should be something that doesn't need to be said. But yeah, as you go for those rods that really tout the unbreakableness factor, just know that that's going to come with a big price and the fact of actual performance on the water. So I highly recommend against those rods, especially for those who want to get better with artificial lures. Because we get that all the time. I pretty much have gone to using artificial lures like 99% of the time. And a lot of people submit questions. A lot of videos show artificial lures. And most of the time, those who are having the most difficulty, when I start asking about their gear, the problem is in the rod, is in having one of those flimsy, I call them wet noodle rods, because you just can't feel anything. You don't have power, you don't have sensitivity, and that is going to significantly hinder your ability to catch fish. If you're using live bait and circle hooks and dead sticking, doesn't even matter, right? Because the rod isn't very important in that case. But if you're using artificial lures, it is crucial to have a good rod. So I just want to keep in. And as far as we talked about power and action, and that was a thing that I had no idea what those were for many years. So I just wanted to take a second to explain those. So the power of the rod, that is just how much, here's a rod over here. Power of the rod is how much power does it take to actually create have the rod bend. It's like, how much power does it take? And then the action of the rod is which sections of the rod bend. So the fast action rods, only the tip is bending. That fast action means that it's going to be fast. Like after you cast, or when you do we call them a dart cast. When you do a dart cast, that rod is going to go back to its equilibrium really fast, and it's going to help you cast further. And so action is how the rod bends. Power is how much force it takes the rod to bend. So just keep that in mind. And as Mark said, the problem though is that when you see, say, a medium heavy power rod from one company, that means nothing when you go to a different brand. Even sometimes within brands themselves, there's big disparity. So it's important to know what those terms are, but it's also important to know that when you're examining from even like a St. Croix, like what is that? The Mojo, like that is a really, like, the medium power feels like the medium heavy power of some of their other rods. And like the TFO that I really like, it's a medium power, and that actually feels just like this E6X. I just got this E6X, and to have the same feel, I had to go to a heavy power. So it actually skipped. It went from a medium on one brand to a medium heavy to have the same actual feel of performance. So that's one problem, and that makes all this more confusing, is that it's just really hard to know unless you get a specific recommendation from somebody on here. Here's exactly what you need, which obviously is what we do as part of the club. But it's just really hard to know exactly what to get if you don't have that feel dialed in yet. If that makes sense.
So Bill DeWeese mentioned something recently. He says, I've been downsizing my rods from 7.6 to 7, even 6.6. I like them better when standing on the deck of the boat. Giving up some casting distance to go to 7.6 to 6.6.
You know, I think that's more based on style of fishing, though, Joe. You know, if I'm, you know, sitting flat to the water on kayak, and Wyatt can, you know, of course, chime in on this. You know, to me, I would use a rod that's more conducive with getting range. You know, wide open casting. I'm going to cast as far as I can. But on a boat, you know, a 6.6 rod comes into perspective whenever you're real close to structure. You know, you don't want a tall stick, you know, that you would normally get distance with. You know, the shorter the stick, you can be a lot more accurate when underhand casting or skipping under something and you're real close to structure. So I think all of them have their case and cause. But if you were to put a percentile on your standard way of fishing, you are 100% correct. The 6.6 will certainly reduce casting performance drastically because it won't allow that rod to load and unload with that much more, you know, force than what a taller rod would do. You get a lot more distance on that, you know. But you know, I don't know, Wyatt, on your kayak fishing, I know that you're creating a lot of content, and I know that you know, fish with St. Croix, and I know that you do a lot of that stuff with the Mojo stuff. Are you still using taller rods for your down low fishing?
So I'm actually going to break into, you know, this rod versus another one that I've been testing. And, you know, both of these are Daiwas. And I'll basically kind of break down why I have this one on this setup and why I have this one on this setup. So, you know, we're talking about a shorter rod right now. And I've got this Mojo Yak right here. And I picked this one up. They actually have two different options for this rod for spinning. One is a medium heavy power and one is a just straight medium. Now the medium heavy is 7.6. Typically I like to fish with a 7.6, but I knew I was going to be using this rod, you know, this short butt here is really great for finesse movements. I love it, you know, for jigging, super comfortable wind grips. I knew this was going to be a rod I was going to be using for, you know, jigging small paddle tails. This one's, you know, had the tail bit off by some trout. You know, other small soft plastics that I'm really doing finesse movements with. I wanted to choose, you know, the medium rod, and I wanted it to be shorter because, you know, with finesse movements, typically you want to have your accurate cast to your fish. This past week, I have put a report up. You know, I found some tailing redfish, and especially when you find fish and you can see them, you need to make sure you're making accurate casts and the movements that you're making are just very precise and fine-tuned and as natural as possible. I saw Josh, I don't know how to say his last name, Carreno, said he saw 50 snook the other night. I believe it was in Paso Grill. I don't know, Josh, you know, what your retrieve looked like or where you were casting on those snook. You had the slam shady, which we know, you know, snook love, and they will hit it, you know, 9 out of 10 times, but that one time out of 10 that they're not going to hit it, typically it's going to be because, you know, it wasn't put in the right place and it wasn't retrieved properly. This rod, you know, we were talking about how our rod's built with high modulus graphite and the extreme sensitivity. This is a high modulus graphite rod. It's machined with the IPC technology right here. And what that means is, you know, with some other rods, what they're going to do is, you know, when you get to certain points in the rod, they're going to bevel it down, you know, with the machine bevel. With the IPC rods like this, what's going to happen, they're going to bevel the rod, you know, uniformly. So it's super sensitive. It does take away, you know, a little bit of that strength. But, you know, with that, I really like the sensitivity for these rods. I'm doing sensitive movements, and I've got, you know, a really light reel on here. We were talking about reel rod pairing. With finesse movements, I like the lightest reel possible. I'm, you know, making very quick, rapid movements, and a heavier reel is going to slow that really quick jerk down. Now, we take a look at this rod right here. This is one of Luke's old favorites, the Redbone. I don't know if Hurricane makes it anymore, different manufacturer, but it's that Redbone rod. This is, you know, we're talking about how some ratings are different. This is a medium fast as well. It's not made with, you know, the same exact materials. It's not machined with IPC, but I like, you know, the heavier reel because I'm typically going to use this for larger lures, you know, a larger swim bait that may be 5 inches or a top water that I'm not working as fast. A slower movement, I'm going to want, you know, a rod with a little bit more backbone because I'm planning to catch larger fish on this. Larger redfish, larger trout is what I'm targeting, you know, when I'm throwing these lures. So I want a rod that's going to have that backbone. I don't need the really sensitive movements that I have on that other rod. So I don't necessarily need a lighter reel. I'm making slow, you know, dull movements with the top water while I'm walking the dog. So, you know, you need to make sure that you're picking your rods first based on the activity that you're going to be doing. Are you doing finesse movements? Are you going to be doing a constant retrieve? Are you going to be doing, top water action? That's the first step when you pick a new setup, is figure out what you're going to be doing. Pick the rod first and then figure out what would go well with that. As we talked about finesse movements, you're really going to want a lighter reel. With your top waters, you're generally going to be targeting larger fish. So a larger reel with a better drag, this is a little bit heavier. This is the ballistic versus the fuego, slightly heavier. It's got a little bit faster of a line pickup, because I'm working my top waters. And the drag, I feel personally, is a little bit better than the fuego. It's a little bit stronger. And it's, this reel does not exhibit the exact same flex that the fuego does, which has been something people have brought up. I'll have a review on this coming up soon, but I'm really liking this when I'm using my top water, some of my larger swim baits. It just holds up very, very well. But that's, my comparison between those two, especially with that St. Croix you wanted me to elaborate on, Mark, is you just really need to pick what you're doing first, pick the rod, and then pick the reel next. That's kind of the steps in how you pair a rod. Figure out what you're going to do, figure out which rod's going to work for that, and then figure out which reel is going to pair with that best.
I think another big movement in and I'm glad that you just said something about the IPC. So what Wyatt is saying, for those that don't understand what IPC means, you've probably heard of the taper of a rod. And what he's indicating is it's quickly tapering from a large section at the butt handle down to a very small section at the bottom end. So it tapers uniformly all the way down to a very light weighted tip. So that's one of the nice things about St. Croix, is they have a lot of consistency there in the rod blank. And I think that if you look at other brands, you can kind of see that whenever you look at their tip design, you can kind of see like their tip is maybe off slanted a little bit on some brands, or it gets choked down to a really, really small tip. To me, the rod manufacturers have kind of gone two different ways. They put a fork in the road. The live bait rods, and I have Loomis here in front of me, so I'll just talk Loomis right now, but you'll see it consistent with a lot of brands, is they're starting to make rods that are technique specific. Okay. And the reason why is they've seen that the general public want to spend a little bit more money to get a nice combo, to do kind of a multiple approach to things. We're not buying, back in the day, and I'll use my bass days, you don't have a crankbait rod, you don't have a worm rod, we don't do those kinds of things on the saltwater side. We want to have one good combo that kind of does all things. Loomis still kind of has that old kind of philosophy. They made a green water for their live bait scenario, because that tip is so soft that it will load and unload on something as small as a pilchard for bait, versus a E6X that I have here in front of me. These are more conducive to the artificial market, that fast taper. You put a really lightweight pilchard on this E6X, you're going to have to sling your arm to get that bait out there because of how light some of the scenarios are with live bait. So Loomis is still one of those rare companies that still build and manufacture a rod based on technique. Most other brands, though, they want to encompass all of inshore fishing into one rod. And I think that that's where the St. Croix, the TFOs, a lot of companies do so well at, is because they're so versatile in the approach of what one rod can do in all scenarios. So that's another very important thing to consider. Is this going to be your one combo setup? If it is, then I might steer you away from such a fine rod like an E6X and put you with something that will handle the breadth of what you're doing inshore fishing wise. Okay. There are rods that are just better as an all-around rod than something so technique specific that Loomis does so incredibly well with. Let's just kind of force you into a better category per se.
So, give an example of one, Mark. I know, we recommend TFO a lot, just because that's been a great price for the value they hold up. And I believe it is just a great all around rod. Agree? Is that?
I think the biggest thing, yes, I agree 100%. I always told this to my wife whenever we picked out a vehicle. Okay. Take the name brand off the vehicle. Okay. And then tell me if you still like it. And that's the same thing with rods, in my opinion. Take the name brand off the rod and fill it, use it, work with what it actually fishes like, okay? And then tell me if that's the best fit for you. And I think that that's where Temple Fork does a great job. You know, if you put a G. Loomis name on a Temple Fork rod, I'm sure that they would probably sell a lot more just because of name recognition. But take name brands off, fish it for the actual quality of the product. And I'm telling you, Temple Fork would shock a lot of people as to how great of an all-around rod it truly is.
Yeah,
What car did you end up getting?
We don't need to talk about that. Let's just say my wife won't earn, you know, she won't run anything unless it's German. All right.
Let's say she heard you, but she didn't listen to you about taking the name brand off.
Yeah. Let's just say she's a German kind of gal.
And first we had that guy talk about snook fishing at night. The paddle tails, really, I've been doing some night fishing. The paddle tails haven't been doing very good for that. There's a lot of shrimp that are getting flushed out, and those snook are dialed in on shrimp. So a paddle tail going through there is going to totally not appeal to them. You're better off actually taking the tail off and then cranking it through without the tail. Those shrimp, when they're scared, they're flinging through those lights, and without the tail and ripping it fast, you'll have a better shot at getting a reaction strike. So that's a lot of times if you and those snook get a lot of pressure over there. And so if you give them a lot of time to analyze it, they're not going to eat it. So you have to crank it through without a big vibration, and that should do the trick. But as far as the rods, I mean, I'm talking about kayak fishing before, and I think for kayak fishing, unless you're fishing up under trees, I think it's totally okay to go with a longer rod, as Mark said. Casting distance, right? A rod is a lever, right? And it's for spinning tackle. It's all about tip speed. So with the same exact motion, you can have more tip speed the longer the lever, the longer the rod. But that only matters for the amount of rod that's above your top hand, above the reel. And so the butt length is important for two reasons. For kayakers especially, is when you're sitting down casting, the butt is going to become a problem. Especially if it's a windy day, your shirt's gonna be blowing around, and now when you're casting, your butt's getting stuck around your shirt, and that's a huge pain. So here are two rods. These are two 7'6" rods. Bottom one is Star, top one is TFO, and look at the difference on where these reels are, right? So this one, the butt length is 10 inches. So from the actual start of the reel to the butt 10 inches. This Star one, the butt of the reel to the reel to the actual butt of the rod is 14 inches. That's 4 inches difference. So that's going to have, for kayakers especially, you need a shorter butt. I like 9-10 inches I think is a good mix of getting out of the way, but still being able to, when you're fighting a big fish, to let this part just rest on your forearm. But so now let's equate this, right? So now I shift this up, I make these equal. Now this rod, right, this 7'6" rod is going to cast like it's 4 inches longer than this one, because from the start of the reels, like where our top hand is to the actual lever that's doing the casting, has an extra 4 inches. So when you get a shorter butt rod, you first of all help for kayak fishing, but you help for all fishing, because now you can store it like a 7'6" rod. It's a lot easier to manage in travel or in transit, but it casts better, right? So I highly recommend. Now I totally stay away from these long butt rods. I don't feel there's any need for them. They do more harm than good. You might as well just get a little bit shorter butt rod, and you'll see that you can feel casting performance that's better.
Luke likes short butts and he cannot lie. You other English can't deny.
I should have known better.
I knew it was going to go sideways quickly.
I forgot to show this earlier, but we were talking about the Mojo Yak. You can see how much shorter the butt is. You can see where the reel sits for this red bone versus this Mojo Yak. That's another reason I really like this rod for my kayak. That real estate, like you said, Luke, between your lap and the rod handle, especially when you're making movements, that short butt is fantastic. I love it, but I definitely get a little bit less distance.
Quiet like short butts and it cannot lie. You other things can't deny.
The another thing about short butts is now. See, y'all are going way wrong with this. Now what Luke was saying is it's putting more rod out in front of you, right? So it's actually doing another thing too that most anglers need to understand is now that's creating a weight forward technology. And that's why that tip becomes so much more important on a cast because you have more weight in front of you to load and unload on that cast. Same thing with archery. Most of the arrows that are made now have that weight forward technology for that spline, for the load and unload scenario of that rod. So another very, very important point to that.
So what are you guys' thoughts on the like the guides, those the microwaves? That's one thing. I want to find a rod that has them that has either option so I can do some casting tests with them. I've tried a couple rods with them and I haven't noticed a difference. They're supposed to cast further, and microwave guides are the ones where it starts at a normal size and it tapers down to get like super small really, really fast. Relative to like a normal spinning rod, which the eyes are big and they kind of progressively get smaller. Mark or Wyatt, anybody, have you guys seen a difference on like how
I actually have, Luke. I was messing around with, and again, I don't like throw names around, but I'll just say, so it was a Fitzgerald Aqua Dream rod. It has a microwave guide system all the way up. And again, a lot of this industry, as we all know, they want to throw out bullet points for the consumer to get hooked on, right? Why certain things are the way that they are, and that we as a company at Saltstrong, we kind of take that industry fluff out of it. We put our own, test to the market, and then we kind of, sometimes agree and sometimes disagree with what they put out. But I have actually seen a difference in casting with that rod compared to a standard rod, that he makes. Now, if that is what I don't have the access to is to take that same rod that has the that guide train on it and use the same blank with a different guide set. That I don't have, but I understand the concept. The concept truly is to choke down that line the fastest possible way to make that line more lineal going through the rod as it loads and unloads. So I understand the concept behind it. But I have in fact used the rod and I love it. I love it. I just feel that I'm choking down my line, especially because before I came on to Saltstrong, I was using heavier line just because the industry said, I need to be a 20-pound braid guy on a 3000. Again, a lot of that information out there, now that I see the advantages of 10-pound test on cast, I still think that it chokes the line down faster. So.
I mean, I can second that. I've found with, my rod guides that have a tighter choke, I feel like I can cast further with them. It's the same principle of, a shotgun versus a rifle. You've got, a larger barrel, same reason you put a choke on a shotgun if you're hunting ducks or whatever. You want that projectile to go further. So you're going to choke that, area down where you're lengthening the shot essentially. And Penn has done that with some of their reels. They've decreased the width and they've increased the length of the the spool, and that's contributed to the Penn long cast models for some of their different reels, which I'm going to be testing sometime soon. But I have found with a tighter guide system, I feel like I can cast further. Now in terms of the material of the guide, I prefer aluminum oxide. They're really light. I have had some guides that, I can feel it in the rod. They're terribly heavy, but any aluminum oxide guides I've got on my rods, I prefer those over other materials. I haven't even looked into some of the heavier stuff to see which would be better because, I default to a aluminum oxide guide.
Wyatt, it's also entirely possible you have got a lot more extra strength and muscle from growing a beard. So just got to throw that out there.
That could be it,
All right. So let's do a quick little case study because this is probably one of our top selling spinning reels for the inshore side. We obviously have a shop page, shop.saltstrong.com, that's going to go undergo some big transformations here very, very soon. And of course, our insider members get 20% off. So this is the Fuego 3000. Yes, 3000. this is normally $100, $99. Obviously, our members get it at 80. So we have a lot of members buying this. And the question comes up, what should I pair this up with? And I usually send them to Mark. Mark, how do you respond to people? What questions do you ask them, just like a good doctor would? And what are you recommending?
Yeah, to me, I want to break down how they're going to use the product. To me, that's most important. If they are wanting to use probably the hottest lure on the market, like a Slam Shady, for instance, if they're going to use an artificial bait, I'm going to steer them in methods to get them the optimum performance of their everyday use. Okay. So first, I want to break down the cause behind the combo. And then from there, a lot of manufacturers, they have products that meet certain budgets. And what we try to do is get them the best bang for the buck based on their budget. And with all things considered, I then start to educate them, why certain rods are why they are. And to me, I can hold up, not that, again, I just have the E6X in front of me. To me, I can tell them the benefits of why this rod is, better in scenarios and why it's more money. Okay. Why this cork handle costs more money than the cork handle on, they say, a Temple fork. Okay. And there's no filler here. There's no extra additive to make this a solid cork handle. Then blank material, then guide trains, and then inserts. Sorry for the background noise of the page.
You're in a tackle store right now.
That's right. It's burning and turning here. So to me, it really comes based on, their fishing acumen, Joe. If they're brand new to the business, if they don't know how to do certain things, then I'm probably going to take them a different route. Okay.
All right, let's actually do a real case study. So let's say I have my budget is definitely under 200.
Okay.
And I'm mostly artificial lures, and I'm not a beginner. I am just kind of a newer weekend warrior.
Okay. So to me, my scenario is the ones that I have most confidence in. So I use two brands for most scenarios. I use Alumis and I use Temple Fork. And the reason why I use both of those is, number one, my E6X, I understand the quality, I understand the feel. And me doing this so long, I know what feels good in my hand. So I'm going to, let my consumers know the why when it comes to the feel.
And one other thing that I want to mention about you and why we trust Mark so much is Mark has been working in a tackle store for many years, and we're talking millions and millions of dollars going in and out the door. And what I mean by, coming back in is all the stuff that gets returned, right? And all of a sudden you're now at the top and part owner of a tackle store, or even just the manager, you get to see everything that's getting returned. And there's a lot of value in there, because I've seen a lot of people have said, oh, I bought this one reel, whether it be Shimano or Penn or Daiwa, and I had a problem. That's why they all suck. And all these companies, regardless of even the very, very top ones, they're occasionally going to have a bad reel or a bad rod or bad whatever. It happens in manufacturing. There's only so much quality control that can go into any brand out there. And I think it's unique over a long period of time, not just buying one reel and having a bad experience, to see what's getting returned and what has the most issues. So I throw that out there to let you guys know that Mark has a lot of really good intel as well, not just on what feels good, but also what's lasting the longest and what has the fewest amount of complaints and returns.
And great point. And the bottom line is I know what works for me. Okay. I've had a lot of days on the water, like we can all attest to. I have a feel that I can close my eyes and I know what I have in my hand. And when you're that frequent of a user with the product, you gain confidence in the product. And I have a lot of confidence in those two brands on rods. And not to say that, the St. Croix of the world, who is actually one of the premier rod makers in our industry, not to say that they have a bad rod. It's just I have found two that work very good for me. I like the performance of both sticks, and I can speak to the components of each of those rods with a lot of confidence. Okay. When people are breaking rods, Luke was talking about that. I've never broken a rod. The reason why Luke has never broken a rod is Luke doesn't use the rod outside of its performance measures. Okay. Luke knows that it's not good to high stick it, not to keep it vertical, not to make it a 90 degree. You're fighting the fish out in front. He's setting his drag right. So when you do those things, the two rods that I just mentioned, for your case, Joe, you have $100 Fuego. I have no problem in offering a $100 TFO rod all the way up to a $200 E6X, because I know that the E6X and the TFO are going to perform to its intended purpose, that it will handle the scenario of I'm going to use inshore baits like a Slam Shady on a jig head, and it's going to perform to that standard.
Cool, that's good, man.
Yeah, I'll say one thing to keep in mind too is balancing them out weight wise, proportionally, and so as far as at least what I think is the best way to do it is I try to balance it out so that if I find the equilibrium point and I want it to
that's some Jedi stuff there now. That's Jedi.
I want it to be about where my hand naturally sits, right? So when I'm holding this, when I'm retrieving my lure, my hand's right about here, and this is perfectly weighted for that retrieve, right? If I can balance it on my finger right at this point, right at the top of the handle, to me that's perfect. And so if I'm jigging something with a vertical, if I'm holding it up high, just to have the torque not be hitting my wrist, so I'm fishing all day long, I try to make everything as efficient as possible. I know that if I want to just make it easier to retrieve with the lure up, now I put my hand a little bit further up. Now I'm actually on the blank itself, and that's okay. Now gravity is keeping the tip up, which is what I want to do. And then if I'm using a top water and it's windy and I'm throwing crosswind, I want that line on the water. I want my rod tip next to the water. Then I'll choke back down a little bit, and now gravity is helping me put the rod tip on the water. So when you have it balanced out properly, you'll be able to just quickly go from a rod up retrieve to a rod down retrieve, and your hand is always in a spot that feels comfortable, that feels natural.
If you guys are listening via the podcast, Luke is basically putting the how would you explain that, Luke? Putting the rod right where you hold it, putting your top finger and balancing it on one finger. It's like,
yeah, it's just really just balancing with one finger. So here's that E6X rod, which is a higher end rod. It's much lighter, and that takes the balance out of play. If you use this rod and this expensive reel, right? So a lot of people go out and get this E6X and they put a CI4 on it. This reel is, in my opinion, is too light for this rod, right? So normally I want my equilibrium point to be like right at the top, right where my hand should be. And if I take my hand off, this is like super tip heavy. So the equilibrium point on this one is way up here. Now I'm like almost 3 inches up the rod blank for my equilibrium point. I don't really want to retrieve my setup right here. That just doesn't feel natural. So in this case, I would recommend a heavier reel like the Daiwa BG or just some reel like this CI4. I think is 7.5 or maybe 7.6 ounces. So I think a 10-ounce reel would probably be better suited for this particular rod if I wanted to use a finesse soft plastic where my rod tip's up and I'm doing some twitches. So that's at least just something that I've found over the years is try to get a rod reel combo that is balanced out properly.
Yep. And Dan had asked what reel. Again, this is the Daiwa Fuego 3000. And I would say amongst our team now of 10 people at Salt Strong, this is probably the most frequently bought internally. And it's also now the most frequently bought from our insider members. And the reason is, I mean, Luke just had that Stratic. This looks and feels very similar to the Stratic. We have dunked both this Daiwa Fuego and the Stratic CI4 in saltwater multiple times, some by accident, or maybe all by accident. And yet these things both still keep working really, really well. We're talking about a difference of $80 if you're an insider member, goes 20% off compared to what, $240 then minus the 20% off on a Stratic. We love Stratic. I have some and got this Sustain here, which is another very expensive reel. But by and large, if I had to just pick one, this is usually my go-to. And as Mark said, pairing it up with, either a TFO or say G Loomis or St. Croix. Yeah, G Loomis.
Yeah. And St. Croix is a fine rod too, though. Joe, I'll tell you, the two top guys that have always had that industry name have always been Loomis and St. Croix. That's who the industry sets themselves, to compare against. That is the threshold, and the reason why is, they're not concerned about cranking out 5,000 rods a day. They want to have that quality control mastered in their product, and it shows. Yes, it's in the price point. Yes, they don't have production rods per se, and that's why you see less flaws in their product.
Yeah, and I recommend go into a store, because when you feel it, like, get one of those expensive rods and just put the tip on the ground and just have it bend, and that way you can feel how much power it takes to bend the rod, and you can see the curvature of the rod. You can see where it's bending, and then just try to find a less expensive rod, or if you're on a budget, get one of those super nice ones, and then just try to find a less expensive rod that has that same feel and flex. In many cases, you'll find some good deals. That's how I stumbled upon TFO. I was on the way to get a much more expensive rod and stumbled across this one, and I was like, man, this feels the exact same.
And isn't G Loomis behind TFO or something like?
So what Temple Fork did many years ago, I'd say it's probably been about 5-6 years now. Is what they did is Temple Fork really made their name in the fly fishing industry. I mean, they are one of the top dogs when it comes to fly fishing, and they wanted to start making a market name for themselves in the conventional base. So the spinning rods, the conventional rods, boat rods, but they didn't know how to cross that bridge. They didn't know how to taper that rod. They didn't know how to make that product. So they actually hired Gary Loomis to come into their company and to kind of educate them on the building process, what kind of tapers work best for the scenario. So to answer your question, no, Gary didn't make anything for Temple Fork related. He was more of a in-house guy that really educated their staff as to what the consumer public wants. Okay. And that's how, that relationship kind of started. Then Gary kind of, morphed off and went into North Fork Composites and started to make his own Edge series of products through North Fork. But no, he was really hands-on with the deliverable for TFO. So
why all these rod companies love Fork so much? Temple Fork, North Fork, Power Fork.
That's right.
Cool, guys. What else you guys have? I see it's already 1 o'clock. Any other final notes? Any thing on even buying combos? That's come up a bit. Should you ever buy a generic combo at the store?
The biggest thing, going, because again, my extensive history as a store owner, combos are meant to do one thing, and that is to have a ready to fish scenario in your hand for less money. The value, 90% of the value is in the reel. Okay. I don't care what manufacturer it is. 90% of the value is the reel. They're going to give you a rod that color matches the reel.
Ooh, that's cute. That's cute. Maybe in the same color braid too?
I fish same color braid, so don't knock me there. But the rod choices, and I think that this is where one of the facets of what Penn does so good at is Penn will make products color matching. It's eye catching. It's a marketing thing, and they do an extremely good job at that. But the rods are terrible. Okay. I'm not saying that Penn rods are terrible. I'm talking about combo rods in general are terrible. So it's a very poor quality graphite. The guides on it are very, very poor in quality guides. The cork is probably the worst quality cork that you're going to get if it's not EVA foam. So it's a devalued way to be able to fish instantly. Okay, so if you look at that $150 combo, understand that $120 of that $150 combo is the reel. Okay,
which is the less important part.
Exactly.
Because for years I was going on getting those combos, and for years I was struggling, mostly because I didn't know where to fish. But it didn't help that I had bad gear. So yeah, I cringe when I see most combos because, as Mark said, usually it's the rod that's the thing that is that you're suffering from
Yeah.
the low price.
But most of those decisions are based on budget. I mean, let's be frank. I mean, to get a decent quality product in today's saltwater environment, you're going to spend $200. I mean, any way that you cut it, and to do that, you're going to have to spend more money, and that's what Penn has realized. I can put out a series of combos from $79 to $200 that fills that gap until someone that fishes at an intermediate level and above understands the quality behind the purchase. So they know that.
Yeah, I would say to save money, get at least a pretty good rod, and then put just a less expensive reel on it. Like this, we had a question come in about Pisco Fun. Or actually, it was a statement saying that he loves Pisco Fun. These reels, they're inexpensive. This was like a $70 reel. It's a 2000 series, and I caught a 41-inch snook with it last year. The drag wasn't good. Like I could feel that drag, like literally bouncing and having some static issues. So I lightened the drag up and it didn't pop. And I had Otis on the boat too, and somehow ended up landing the thing. But it feels great. Like it's weighted properly for this rod. This is a $200 rod. I put it on a nice rod, but it feels great. And other than the drag just not being very smooth, it's actually been a solid setup. So you can definitely go under the $100 mark. And when you do that, I would highly recommend going under the $100 mark on the reel and not the rod.
I agree. Especially the kayak guys, like the one that Wyatt has. I mean, that little Mojo kayak rod with that short butt wing grip rod. I mean, that's a killer little rod.
Yeah, and when kayak fishing, especially, and because I go my paddleboard a lot, and it's going to happen. You're going to be fighting a fish or whatever, and lose track, and somehow the reel's going to end up in the water, and it feels way worse to dunk a $200 reel than it does a $50 reel. So I've caught one of my biggest snook ever on the Shimano Sonora. So I think they sell them at Walmart for like $40. It can handle some big fish. It won't last very long, but it'll do its job. And when you put it under pressure, as long as you have the drag set properly, it can catch some really big fish. So again, for money concerns, definitely take it out on the reel and not the rod.
I agree.
Yeah. And the great part about this Fuego is, I mean, you talked about that Pisco Fun being cheap, with your insider discount, $79. I mean, I feel great having that. If it gets dunked, it holds up better than any other reel at that price point I've ever found.
Yeah. I have multiple Fuegos, and I dunked one of them a while back, and I didn't clean it out just to kind of see how it did. And to this day, I still can't remember which one it was. Like they both feel the same, like they're both smooth. And I've never had that happen for an inexpensive reel like that. So I'm like totally sold on the Fuegos. Granted, they're definitely more expensive than those Sonoras that I talked about, but they're only $100, $99 full retail, and only $80 with the discount. To me, it's a no-brainer. Everything has its pros and cons. So the con on the Fuegos, just so you know, we're not just trying to say that the best thing ever made, is that if you're using heavier line and like over 15 pounds, if you like 20 pounds and up, and you're setting that drag pretty tight, the actual arm itself, I don't have one here, but the arm, this part right here will flex because it's made to be really light. And so it doesn't have a metal frame. So it'll flex just a little bit. I don't think it's a big deal, but I don't ever feel it because I'm just using 10-pound line and my drag set properly at 3 pounds. So it's a non-issue to me. But if somebody using 20-pound plus line and have that drag crank down, you're going to feel it flex.
Pat just said, I just fished my Fuego off the bottom of Mosquito Lagoon. Works great still. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I dunked a Noski right next to my. It was actually this one right here. It was my 25.
Nasty Noski.
Yeah, they're the exact that I can't remember which one was the answer to which, but the Noski's Shimano, this one's Daiwa, and I mean I like some Shimano products, but I like some Daiwa products, but my Noski's dead, it's gone. This Fuego was dunked at the exact same time. My kayak halfway flipped over, both of them went in the water. This one's still alive, so holds up really well for the same price point.
Wyatt, that's why fat guys don't go on kayaks. I don't own one.
On that note, we got fat guys Short butts. This has been a really, really fun one, guys. If you haven't joined us in the Insider Club, what the heck are you waiting for? Come join us. Come join the network. Guys like Pat Ogletree are in there. By the way, Pat, I love reading your reports. One of my favorite things to do every morning is to wake up with coffee and actually read all the insider reports. It's our private community we built just for our members, and it is awesome. It's broken out by region, by species, by date. You can look at all the reports on a map. And guys like Pat, I mean, they're leaving some really, really amazing intel, and a good storyteller on all his fishing reports. So everyone, thank you so much for all the support, all the love. Come join us in the Insider Club. Save 20% off all your reels, all your rods, all your line, lure, tackle, terminal tackle, etc. Or not all, well, it should be all of it because we're only giving you the best stuff. And
All that you need.
all that you need. That's the right phrase, Lukey. Come August 1st, a lot of you have been saying, hey, when are you going to get, the Fuegos and Shimano and all this stuff back in? August is looking like the time frame. There has been an industry-wide shortage and just a massive supply chain. It's a fiasco is really the word. Some of these companies, like Shimano, were like literally out. Just completely out, meaning no one, not even if you're Bass Pro, could get anything in. So it has been a really, really tough time with this COVID. It's just slowed everything down, but it feels like it's slowly getting better. I know we've got some pretty big shipments, some pretty big orders coming in for our Insider members. So stay tuned. You'll see an all new looking and much faster loading shop page on August the 1st with a lot of new and improved products on there. And of course, iCast is happening right now as we're recording this. And there'll be a lot of new products coming out. Usually that's more 2021, but some of these companies will be releasing some things earlier than that. And I heard our name on the Z-Man iCast. That's all I will say. You might want to go watch the Z-Man iCast update towards the end. They mentioned Salt Strong and Slam Shady on there. So might be having some Z-Man. Slam Shady's coming back finally, and they've been another one that they're months and months and months behind. We have had a massive order that we put in, I believe, back in February, to just give you perspective, and it's almost August right now. That's how long things are taking. It's been really brutal. So thank you guys for your patience, for all the support, and Wyatt, Mark, Luke, thank you guys. This has been a good one, an educational one. And hit us up with questions. Our Insider members obviously get precedence and a little bit of extra love on top of everyone, because we can only reply to so many comments. So if you're an Insider member, make sure to post your questions in the community. We get to those ASAP. Otherwise, we'll have this on our blog at saltstrong.com. You can leave a question down below. We out. Peace.
Peace.